I never thought I'd be taking off my wedding ring at 76. 10 years after Harold passed, I still wore it out of habit, out of respect, out of fear that removing it meant forgetting him entirely. But standing in my kitchen that Tuesday morning, watching the Oregon rain streak down my windows, I finally understood something my friend Gloria had been trying to tell me for months. "Dot," she'd said over coffee, "that ring isn't keeping Harold alive. It's keeping you buried with him." I twisted the simple gold band around my finger, remembering how Harold had slipped it on 49 years ago, promising to love me forever. He'd kept that promise until his last breath. But what about my promise to myself to keep living? Would I ever find the courage to love again? Or would everyone just keep laughing at the very idea? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I suppose I should start at the beginning, though at my age, beginnings feel more like continuations of stories already half told. My name is Dorothy Ellison, but everyone calls me Dot, and I've lived in Sunset Bay, Oregon, for the better part of 50 years. This coastal town has watched me grow from a young bride to a seasoned principal, from a mother to a grandmother, and finally, from a wife to a widow. The house I call home sits 3 blocks from the Pacific, close enough that I can hear the waves on quiet nights and smell the salt air every morning when I open my bedroom window. Harold and I bought this place in 1974, back when the paint was fresh and our dreams felt infinite. Now the blue shutters need touching up, and the garden gate squeaks something awful. But I can't bring myself to change either. Some imperfections become part of your story. My daily routine has settled into a comfortable rhythm that most people my age would recognize. I wake at 6:30, make my coffee in the same ceramic mug Harold gave me for our 20th anniversary, and spend the first hour of daylight in my garden. The roses need constant attention, and the coastal winds play havoc with anything delicate. But there's something deeply satisfying about coaxing beauty from soil and weather. 3 mornings a week, I volunteer at the Sunset Bay Public Library, helping with the children's reading program and organizing the community book club. Tuesday afternoons, I have lunch with Gloria, my dearest friend and the only person brave enough to tell me when I'm being ridiculous. Gloria retired from her job as a flight attendant 5 years ago and moved to Sunset Bay specifically to be closer to me. She claimed she wanted ocean views, but I suspect she was worried about me rattling around in this big house alone. "Dot," she told me just last month, while we shared fish and chips at Murphy's Diner, "you're only 76, not 96. You've got good bones, or your teeth, and enough retirement money to travel if you wanted. Why are you acting like your life is over?" I'd laughed it off, the way I always do when conversations turn toward my supposed wasted potential. The truth is, I'm not unhappy with my quiet life. After 43 years of managing middle school chaos as Sunset Bay's longest-serving principal, I've earned the right to move at my own pace. I raised 3 children, buried both my parents and my husband, survived cancer twice, and put 15 different sets of students through graduation. If I want to spend my remaining years reading mystery novels and perfecting my rose garden, I figure I've earned that privilege. But lately, something has been shifting inside me, like a tide changing direction. Maybe it's the way my daughter, Emily, looks at me during our weekly phone calls, as if I'm a fragile antique she's afraid might break. Maybe it's how my 16-year-old grandson Ryan asks me with genuine concern if I'm doing okay out there all by yourself. Or maybe it's simply that Harold's been gone long enough for the sharp edges of grief to soften into something more manageable. The catalyst for this particular story began 3 weeks ago. On what seemed like an ordinary Thursday, I was shelving return books in the library's fiction section when I overheard 2 women my age discussing their friend Margaret's recent announcement that she was putting herself back out there at 73. Can you imagine? The first woman whispered, though she was standing close enough to me that whispering seemed pointless. Dating at our age, Margaret's lost her mind, completely embarrassing, the second woman agreed. What's next? Online dating profiles? Speed? Dating events at the senior centre? Some people just don't know when to quit. I found myself gripping a paperback romance novel so tightly that I bent the cover. These women, whom I'd known for decades, were talking about love and companionship as if they were privileges that expired at a certain age. As if wanting connection, intimacy, or even simple human touch became unseemly once you qualified for Medicare. That night, I called Gloria and repeated the conversation word for word. "Those old biddies are jealous," Gloria said without hesitation. "Margaret's got more courage in her pinky finger than they've got in their whole dried-up bodies." Good for her. But don't you think there's some truth to what they're saying? I mean, we're not exactly in our prime anymore. Prime. Gloria's voice rose to what I call her flight attendant dealing with difficult passengers pitch. Dot, listen to me very carefully. You spent 49 years taking care of Harold, 3 children, hundreds of students, and this entire community. When exactly was your prime supposed to happen? When you were 22 and exhausted from sleepless nights with babies. When you were 45 and managing teenagers while working 60-hour weeks. When you were 65 and caring for Harold through his cancer treatments. I hadn't thought about it that way before. The women I'd admired growing up, my mother and her friends, had seemed to accept that romance belonged to the young. They'd transitioned from wives to widows with a kind of dignified resignation, as if passion was something you packed away with your wedding dress and only brought out for granddaughters to admire. But what if they'd been wrong? What if I'd been wrong? My reflection was interrupted by a knock at my front door. I glanced at the clock -1:30 in the evening, well past the time when neighbours typically called. Through the peephole, I could see my daughter Emily standing on my front porch, her architect's portfolio clutched against her chest, and wherein written across her features, "Mum, we need to talk," she said the moment I opened the door. Emily inherited Harold's directness along with his dark eyes and my stubborn streak. At 46, she's built a successful architecture firm in Portland and raised her wonderful children. But she still treats me like I might wander into traffic if left unsupervised. Is everything all right? Where are the kids? David's got them for the evening. Mum, I've been thinking about what we discussed last Christmas, about you maybe moving closer to us. I found this wonderful assisted living community in Beaverton. They have arts and crafts, book clubs, even gardening spaces. You'd make friends in no time. I led her into the living room, the same room where she'd announced her engagement 20 years ago, where we'd celebrated countless birthdays and holidays, where Harold and I had shared our last conversation about her future after his death. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was now sitting in his favourite chair, trying to plan my future. Emily, sweetheart, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not ready for assisted living. I'm managing just fine here. Are you? Though when's the last time you did something spontaneous? When's the last time you went somewhere that wasn't the library or the grocery store? Mom, you're disappearing into this house, into this routine, and I'm scared we're going to lose you even though you're still here. Her words stung because they contained just enough truth to hurt. I had been disappearing, in a way, not into illness or incapacity, but into a kind of voluntary invisibility that felt safer than risking judgment or disappointment. I'm fine, Emily, different than I was when your father was alive, but fine. But are you happy? The question hung in the air between us like smoke. Was I happy? I was content, certainly. Comfortable, mostly, but happy. When was the last time I'd felt genuinely, spontaneously happy about something? When had I last looked forward to tomorrow instead of simply accepting it? Happiness isn't the only goal in life. I finally said, falling back on the practical wisdom I dispensed to hundreds of students over the years. Maybe not. But it shouldn't be forbidden either. After Emily left, I sat in Harold's chair and tried to remember what happiness felt like. Not the quiet satisfaction of a job, well done, or the gentle pleasure of a perfect rose bloom, but the kind of happiness that makes you want to call someone, to share good news, to celebrate being alive. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt that way. That night, I lay in bed listening to the ocean and thinking about Margaret, whoever she was, and her decision to date again at 73. I thought about Gloria's words about prime time and wasted years. I thought about Emily's question and my own inability to answer it honestly. Somewhere between the sound of waves and the whisper of wine through my bedroom curtains, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out what happiness felt like again, even if it meant risking the comfortable life I'd built from the ashes of my old one. I just had no idea that happiness would find me first. The morning that changed everything started like any other Friday. I was at the library by 9, armed with my usual thermos of coffee and a mental list of tasks that would keep me busy until closing time. The September air carried the first hint of autumn, and tourists were beginning to thin out. Leaving Sunset Bay to settle back into its sleepy coastal rhythm, I was processing a box of donated books when I found it a pristine first edition of To Kill a Mockingbird, the kind of discovery that makes a librarian's heart skip. The book was in remarkable condition, with no library markings or damage, and I couldn't help but wonder who had parted with such a treasure. "Excuse me, is that the Harper Lee?" The voice behind me was warm, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. I turned to find a man standing at the returns desk, and my first thought was that he looked like he'd wandered out of an L.L. Bean catalogue. Tall, maybe 6'2", with silver-streaked brown hair that needed a trim and eyes the colour of sea glass. He wore a cable-knit sweater that had seen better days and jeans that looked actually worn rather than designer distressed. "Yes, it is. Are you the donor?" I asked, holding up the book. "Guilty as charged." "I'm Julian Reeve. I just moved to town and I'm, well, downsizing drastically." His smile was self-deprecating, and I noticed he had the kind of laugh lines that come from genuine amusement rather than polite social interaction. "This is incredibly generous, Mr. Reeve. A book like this could be worth several $100s. Julian, please." And money isn't really the point. I'd rather see it go to someone who'll appreciate it than sit in storage. There was something about the way he said storage that suggested a story, but I've learned not to pry into people's business unless they volunteer information. Still, I found myself curious about this stranger who gave away valuable books like they were yesterday's newspapers. "Well, on behalf of the library and future readers, thank you. Are you settling in well?" Sunset Bay can take some getting used to if you're from a bigger city. Actually, I'm finding the pace refreshing. I spent too many years moving too fast. This feels like the right speed for the next chapter of my life. Next chapter. I like that phrase. It suggested possibility rather than ending. "Have you found the good coffee yet?" I asked, surprised by my own forwardness. Because the tourist spots will charge you $5 for something that tastes like burnt water, but Murphy's Diner makes a decent cup if you don't mind the ambience of a 1970s truck stop. Julian laughed, a genuine sound that made something flutter in my chest that I'd forgotten could flutter. I've been making do with instant coffee and my own questionable brewing skills. Murphy's sounds like a significant upgrade. Thursday mornings are best. Tuesday if you want to overhear all the local gossip, but Thursday if you actually want to read the paper in peace. I'll keep that in mind. Do you have any other insider recommendations for a newcomer? I found myself leaning against the returns desk, my morning tasks momentarily forgotten. When was the last time someone had asked for my opinion about anything? more consequential than whether the fish or chicken special sounded better. Well, if you're planning to stay through winter, you'll want to get your firewood order in soon. Coastal Oregon rain isn't something to mess around with, and the good supplies get booked up early. There's a farmer's market every Saturday morning through October, better produce than the grocery store, and half the price. And if you're looking for a good book, I gestured around us with a smile. I can see I've come to the right person. For local intelligence, we chatted for another 10 minutes about everything and nothing: the weather, the books on display, his impressions of the town. He mentioned that he was renovating a property on Seaside Drive, the old Victorian that had been empty for years, and I found myself offering practical advice about local contractors and the peculiarities of coastal weather. It wasn't until he'd left with a stack of recommended reading and a promise to try Murphy's on Thursday that I realized I'd been flirting. Actually flirting, at 76, with a complete stranger who could have been, well, who was probably closer to my daughter's age than my own. The realization should have embarrassed me. Instead, it felt like waking up from a long sleep. Well, came Gloria's voice from behind me. I turned to find my friend standing near the biography section, arms crossed and wearing the expression of someone who'd witnessed something interesting. Who was that? A new resident? He donated some books, UHR. And the extended conversation about coffee recommendations. I was being helpful. We provide community information along with library services. Gloria raised one perfectly penciled eyebrow. At 74, she still maintained the grooming standards of someone who'd spent decades representing airlines to the traveling public. Honey, I've seen you provide community information before. That wasn't community information. That was what my grandmother would have called making conversation with a gentleman caller. Don't be ridiculous. He's probably young enough to be my son. From where I was standing, he looked like he was enjoying the conversation just as much as you were. And for the record, he's not young enough to be your son unless you had him when you were 12. That man's got to be in his 50s, minimum. I busied myself with sorting the donated books, trying to ignore the way my hands had developed a slight tremor. It was just friendly conversation, Gloria. Don't read more into it than there was. I'm not reading anything into it. I'm just observing that you've got more color in your cheeks than I've seen in months, and you're organizing those books like you're trying to distract yourself from thinking about something. She was right. Of course, I was thinking about Julian. Reeve, about his easy smile and the way he'd listened when I talked, really listened, as if my opinions about coffee shops and firewood supplies mattered. I was thinking about how long it had been since a man had asked me for advice, had sought out my perspective, had treated me like someone worth knowing rather than someone to be managed or pitied. You know what I think, Gloria continued, settling into her favor a chair by the window. I think the universe just sent you exactly what you needed, exactly when you needed it. The universe sent me a book donation, Gloria. Let's not get carried away. The universe sent you a handsome, age-appropriate man who treats you like an interesting woman instead of a fragile elderly person. That's not coincidence. That's possibility. Possibility. Another word I'd forgotten how to use in relation to my own life. That afternoon, I found myself taking a different route home, one that happened to pass by Seaside Drive. The old Victorian that Julian had mentioned was impossible to miss, a sprawling, weathered beauty that had been the subject of local speculation for years. The previous owner, an elderly woman named Catherine Reeve, had been a bit of a recluse before she passed away 2 years ago. The house had sat empty since then, slowly surrendering to the elements, but now there were signs of life. A pickup truck in the driveway, scaffolding along one side, and the kind of organized chaos that suggests renovation rather than demolition. I slowed my car without quite meaning to, curious about what someone would do with such a massive project. Ellison, I looked up to see Julian emerging from the front door, work gloves in one hand and what appeared to be a sledgehammer in the other, up close, covered in dust and clearly in the middle of hard physical labor. He looked even more appealing than he had in the library's fluorescent lighting. I was just driving by, I said, feeling foolish for being caught, obviously. Gawking. This is quite an undertaking, that's one word for it. Would you like to see what I'm getting myself into? I could use an expert opinion on whether I'm completely out of my mind before I could talk myself out of it. I found myself accepting his invitation and following him through the front door of a house that took my breath away. Even in its current state of controlled demolition, the bones of the place were magnificent. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, and windows that framed the ocean like living paintings. Catherine was my great aunt, Julian explained as we walked through rooms filled with dust cloths and construction materials. I spent summers here as a kid, back when she still had energy for visitors. I always loved this place, but I never imagined I'd end up inheriting it. What made you decide to renovate rather than sell? Julian paused by a window that looked out over the garden, his expression growing thoughtful. Honestly, I reached a point in my life where I realized I'd been living in other people's ideas of success for so long that I'd forgotten what actually made me happy. This house, this town, the pace of life here, it reminds me of who I used to be before I got caught up in the race to become someone else. His words resonated in a way that made my chest tight. I understand that feeling, do you? Most people my age are still climbing ladders, accumulating things, building bigger and faster. Sometimes I think I'm the only one who got tired of all that. You're not, I said quietly. Though I took a different route to the same realization, we spent the next hour walking through the house while Julian shared his vision for each room. He spoke with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found his purpose, but also with a kind of lonely determination that I recognized. This was a man starting over, just like I was contemplating starting over. The difference was that he'd had the courage to actually begin. As I prepared to leave, Julian surprised me with an invitation. I don't suppose you'd be interested in having coffee sometime? Not at Murphy's, necessarily. I'm still working on getting the kitchen functional, but I make a decent cup when I put my mind to it. I should have made an excuse. I should have remembered that I was a 76-year-old widow with a quiet life that worked perfectly well without complications. I should have considered what people would think, what Emily would say, what I would think of myself for entertaining such an obviously ridiculous idea. Instead, I heard myself saying, I'd like that very much. We agreed on Sunday afternoon, and I drove home with my heart beating like I was 16 again. The rational part of my mind kept up a steady stream of objections. He was too young. I was too old. People would talk. It was foolish to read anything into simple kindness. But underneath the rational objections was something I'd almost forgotten existed. Anticipation. That evening, I called Emily for our weekly check-in, and I found myself editing the story of my day in ways that surprised me. I mentioned the book donation and the library volunteer work, but I somehow failed to mention Julian or the house tour or the coffee invitation. It wasn't exactly lying, but it felt like the beginning of a secret. After hanging up, I stood in my bathroom, really looking at myself in the mirror for the first time in months. 76 years looked back at me, silver hair that could use some attention, brown eyes that were still bright, skin that bore the evidence of decades spent gardening and smiling and worrying about other people. I wasn't young, but I wasn't dead either. I thought about what Gloria had said about the universe sending possibility, and I wondered if I was brave enough to find out what that possibility might look like. By Sunday morning, I had my answer. Sunday arrived with the kind of perfect September weather that makes you remember why people fall in love with the Oregon coast. I woke earlier than usual. Not from anxiety, but from something that felt remarkably like excitement. As I tended to my roses in the morning light, I caught myself actually humming for the first time in years. The coffee date wasn't until 2 o'clock, but I found myself changing clothes 3 times, settling finally on a soft blue sweater that Emily had given me last Christmas, and my good jeans. Nothing too formal, nothing that screamed elderly woman trying too hard, but something that made me feel like myself at my best. Gloria called at noon with what she claimed was a casual check-in, but I could hear the curiosity in her voice. "So," she said after we dispensed with pleasantries, "any exciting plans for this beautiful Sunday?" "I'm having coffee with that man from the library, Julian." The pause on the other end of the line was so long, I wondered if we'd been disconnected. "Gloria, I'm here. I'm just processing the fact that my best friend, who hasn't shown interest in any man since Harold passed, is going on what sounds suspiciously like a date. It's not a date, it's coffee." Neighbours being neighbourly. Honey, when was the last time you changed your outfit 3 times for neighbourly coffee? I looked down at myself, wondering how she always seemed to know things she had no way of knowing. How could you possibly a lucky guess? Plus, you've got that particular tone in your voice that women get when they're trying to convince themselves that something isn't what it obviously is. Before I could argue further, Gloria had extracted a promise that I would call her afterward with full details, and I was left staring at my reflection in the hallway mirror, wondering what exactly I thought I was doing. The Victorian on Seaside Drive looked different in daylight, less imposing and more welcoming. Someone, presumably Julian, had cleared the weeds from the front walkway and set a small table and 2 chairs on the wraparound porch. The smell of coffee drifted through the open front door, mixed with the scent of ocean air and sawdust. "Perfect timing," Julian called out as I approached the porch. He emerged from the house carrying a tray with 2 mugs, a small plate of what looked like homemade cookies, and cloth napkins that suggested he put thought into this encounter. "This is lovely," I said, settling into one of the chairs and accepting the mug he offered. The coffee was excellent, rich and smooth without the bitter edge that usually came from home brewing. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I may have gotten a little carried away," he admitted, taking the seat across from me. "It's been a while since I've had company that wasn't trying to sell me something or tell me why I'm making a mistake with this house. People have opinions about your renovation. Oh, everyone has opinions. Too big for one person, too much work for someone my age, too expensive to do properly, too isolated for modern living. You name the objection, someone in town has raised it." I laughed, recognizing the particular kind of small town concern that felt both caring and intrusive. "Let me guess they think you should tear it down and build something practical. That's the most popular suggestion, yes." Though my personal favourite was the woman at the hardware store who suggested I turn it into a bed and breakfast so at least other people could enjoy it after I inevitably give up and move back to whatever city I came from. "Which city did you come from?" Julian's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. "Most recently, San Francisco. Before that, Seattle, Portland, New York. I spent a lot of years moving around for work." "What kind of work keeps you moving like that?" "Technology, software, development, mostly. Nothing very interesting." There was something in the way he said it that suggested the topic made him uncomfortable, so I didn't push. Everyone deserved their privacy, especially when they were starting over. "Well, for what it's worth, I think you're doing something wonderful with this place. Catherine would be pleased to see it loved again." "Did you know her well?" "Not well, but we'd crossed paths over the years. She was a teacher before she retired, like me. We'd run into each other at education conferences, library events, that sort of thing. She struck me as someone who valued quality over convenience, tradition over trends. This house reflects that. We spent the next hour talking about everything, from books to gardening to the peculiarities of coastal weather. Julian was an easy conversationalist, the kind of person who asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to the answers. He wanted to know about my years as a principal, about the changes I'd seen in education and in the town. I found myself sharing stories I hadn't told in years, memories that felt fresh again in the telling. You mentioned being a teacher, he said at one point. Do you miss it? Parts of it? I miss the students, mostly. Teenagers are exhausting and infuriating and absolutely delightful, often in the same conversation. I miss feeling useful in that particular way, helping young people figure out who they want to become. But you don't miss the administrative headaches. I laughed, not even slightly. Budgets and board meetings and parents who think their child's C+ is somehow my personal failing. No, I'm quite content to leave that to younger, more energetic souls. What do you miss most about teaching itself? The question made me pause. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because no one had asked me that before. The moments when everything clicks, I said finally. When a student who's been struggling suddenly understands, or when someone finds their voice for the first time. Those moments when you realize you've helped someone discover something about themselves they didn't know was there. Julian nodded. Slowly, that sounds like the most rewarding kind of work. It was. Though I suppose most meaningful work has that quality, helping people become more than they thought they could be. Is that what you think you're doing with this house? I asked, helping it become more than it thought it could be. Julian's smile was rueful. Maybe. Or maybe I'm hoping it will return the favor and help me become more than I thought I could be. As the afternoon stretched on, I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't in years. There was something about Julian's presence that felt both exciting and comfortable, like discovering a favorite book you'd forgotten you owned. He had the rare quality of making conversation feel like collaboration rather than performance. It wasn't until I glanced at my watch and realized we'd been talking for over 2 hours that I understood how completely I'd lost track of time, Harold. And I had settled into comfortable routines over the years, but we'd never been great conversationalists. Our relationship had been built on shared responsibilities and genuine affection, but not on the kind of intellectual and emotional connection I was discovering with Julian. I should probably let you get back to your demolition, I said reluctantly, gathering my purse and the light jacket I'd brought. Actually, would you like to see what I'm working on today? It's not glamorous, but you might find it interesting. From a historical perspective, I followed him into the house, where he'd been carefully removing layers of wallpaper from what would eventually be the dining room. The process had revealed beautiful original plaster work and exposed brick that had been hidden for decades. Look at this, he said, pointing to an intricate border pattern near the ceiling. Someone covered this up with 3 layers of wallpaper, but underneath it's hand-painted and in perfect condition. I could hear the excitement in his voice, the same tone I used to use when explaining a particularly elegant piece of literature to my students. This wasn't just renovation for Julian, it was archaeology, discovery, restoration of something valuable that had been overlooked. It's beautiful, I said, meaning it. You're not just fixing up an old house, you're bringing back something that was lost. That's exactly how it feels. Every room has surprises, most of them good. It's like the house is telling me its story as I work. As we stood there in the dusty, partially demolished room, surrounded by the evidence of Julian's careful work, I felt something shift inside me. This man wasn't just attractive or charming or good company, though he was all of those things. He was someone who understood the value of uncovering hidden beauty, of taking time to restore rather than replace, of honoring the past while creating space for the future. Walking back to my car, I realized that Julian Reeve was doing for himself exactly what I'd been afraid to do for myself, starting over with intention rather than resignation, choosing possibility over safety. "Thank you for the coffee," I said as we reached my car. "And for sharing your project. It's going to be magnificent. When you're finished, thank you for the company. It's nice to talk to someone who appreciates the process instead of just questioning the sanity of it. Would you like to do this again sometime?" The question was out of my mouth before I'd consciously decided to ask it, but I didn't regret it. Julian's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "I'd like that very much. Maybe next time I can cook something more substantial than cookies. I'd like that too." Driving home, I felt like I was returning from a foreign country, somewhere beautiful and slightly dangerous, where the customs were familiar, but the language was one I'd almost forgotten how to speak. The language of possibility, of beginning again, of allowing myself to want something beyond simple contentment. That evening, Emily called for our weekly check-in, and I found myself facing the question of how much to share. "How was your weekend?" "Mom, you sound different somehow." "Different how?" "I don't know. Lighter, like you were in a good mood about something." I settled into Harold's chair with the phone, looking out at my garden where the late afternoon light was painting everything golden. I had coffee with a new neighbour today. He's renovating the old Victorian on Seaside Drive. That sounds nice. It's good that you're meeting new people. I could hear Emily moving around her kitchen as we talked, probably preparing dinner for her family, juggling our conversation with the practical demands of her busy life. Part of me wanted to tell her more about Julian, about how talking with him had made me feel more like myself than I had in years. But another part of me wanted to keep this new development private, at least until I understood what it meant. "Mom, I've been thinking about what we discussed last week, about you maybe considering a change. Have you given any more thought to moving closer to us?" "I'm quite happy here, Emily. I know you're worrying, but I'm not ready to leave Sunset Bay. It's just that you're so isolated there. When's the last time you did something just for fun?" I thought about my afternoon with Julian, about the sound of my own laughter, about how natural it had felt to ask him to do it again. Actually, I had quite a lot of fun today, really. Doing what? And there was the moment when I had to decide whether to trust my daughter with this new version of myself, or to keep protecting both of us from the possibility that I might be becoming someone she didn't expect. "Just spending time with a friend," I said finally, "but you're right. I should do things just for fun more often." After we hung up, I sat in the gathering dusk and thought about the different kinds of truth. There was the truth that Emily needed, to hear that her mother was safe and content, and not in need of rescue. And there was the truth that I was just beginning to discover that safety and contentment might not be enough anymore, that there were other ways to live the remaining chapters of my life. For the first time in 10 years, I was curious about what those other ways might look like. The Tuesday after our coffee date, I found myself taking longer than usual to get ready for my lunch with Gloria. Not because I was particularly excited about fish and chips at Murphy's, but because I knew I was about to face the interrogation of my life. Gloria was already seated in our usual booth when I arrived, wearing her favorite red lipstick and the expression of someone who had spent considerable time preparing her questions. "Well," she said, before I'd even settled into my seat, "you look like someone who's had an excellent weekend." "Good afternoon to you too, Gloria. Don't try to distract me with pleasantries. I want details, all of them, starting with what you wore and ending with when you're seeing him again." I ordered my usual fish and chips while Gloria waited with exaggerated patience. The lunch crowd at Murphy's was light for a Tuesday, which meant our conversation would be overheard by half the town's retired population. "It was lovely," I said finally. We had coffee on his porch, talked about books and the renovation project. Very civilized. Civilized is not what I'm looking for here. I want to know if there were sparks, chemistry, That moment when you remember you're a woman and not just someone's mother or grandmother. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. Gloria, for heavens. Socky, aha, you're blushing. You never blush about civilized conversation. The truth was, I had felt exactly what Gloria was describing. Sitting on Julian's porch, I'd caught myself noticing things I hadn't paid attention to in years: the way he gestured when he talked, the sound of his laugh, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. I'd remembered what it felt like to want to look good for someone, to choose my words carefully because they mattered to someone new. He's very easy to talk to, I said carefully. Intelligent, thoughtful, and what? And attractive. And interested in you as more than just a neighbour who knows about firewood suppliers. I kicked at my fish, buying time. I think he might be. Yes. Gloria set down her fork and stared at me. Dorothy Ellison, are you telling me that after 10 years of turning down every well-meaning attempt to introduce you to eligible widowers, you've gone and found your own man? I haven't found anything. We had coffee. We're going to have dinner. Gloria's voice rose to a pitch that made several other diners turn to look. You buried the lead completely. When? Where? What are you going to wear? This weekend. He's cooking, and I have no idea what I'm going to wear because I don't have dinner date clothes. I have church clothes and gardening clothes and grocery store clothes. Then we're going shopping. Tomorrow, Portland has plenty of stores that cater to women our age who want to look attractive without looking like they're trying too hard. The idea of shopping for date clothes at 76 felt simultaneously thrilling and absurd. But sitting across from Gloria, seeing the genuine excitement and support in her eyes, I realized that I wanted to try. I wanted to discover what this version of myself might look like. There's something else, I said, lowering my voice. I haven't told Emily about Julian. Not really. What did you tell her? That I met a new neighbour, had coffee with a friend. Nothing untrue, but ... But nothing that would prepare her for the fact that her mother is dating again. Are we dating? Is that what this is? Gloria reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Honey, I don't know what this is, but I know it's the first time in years I've seen you excited about something that's just for you. Don't let fear or other people's expectations talk you out of finding out where it leads. That afternoon, I found myself in my garden with Harold's old trowel, working around the rose bushes while my mind wandered. This garden had been our joint project for 30 years, Harold building the raised beds and trellises, me choosing the plants and handling the daily care. Every corner of it held memories. The corner where we planted Emily's graduation rose, the patch where Harold had tried and failed to grow vegetables, the bench where we'd shared countless evening conversations. I'd kept it exactly as it was. When he died, partly from love and partly from a superstitious fear that changing anything would dishonor his memory. But sitting there among the roses, I wondered if Harold would want me to preserve everything exactly as he'd left it, or if he'd want me to keep growing. Harold had been a good man, steady, dependable, faithful. He'd worked hard, provided well, and never given me reason to doubt his commitment to our family. But if I was honest with myself, which seemed important at this stage of my life, our relationship had been more about shared responsibility than shared passion. We'd built a solid life together without ever experiencing the kind of connection I glimpsed with Julian. That didn't make our marriage less valuable or meaningful. It just made it different from what I was discovering might be possible. Wednesday's shopping trip with Gloria was an education in possibilities I hadn't considered. The stores she chose specialized in what the salespeople called sophisticated women's fashion, clothes that acknowledge the reality of aging bodies or refusing to surrender style or sensuality. Try this, Gloria said, handing me a soft grey dress that looked deceptively simple. It's too young for me. It's too young for me. Maybe? It's perfect for you. You've got great legs and you've been hiding them under loose pants for a decade. The dress fit beautifully, skimming my figure without clinging, hitting just below the knee to show what Gloria declared were definitely worth showing calves. Paired with a soft cardigan and simple jewelry, it made me look like someone who had dressed with care for someone who mattered. That's the one, Gloria announced. Julian won't know what hit him. I'm not trying to hit him with anything. I just want to look appropriate. Appropriate for what? A board meeting? A funeral? You're having dinner with an attractive man who asked you out because he enjoys your company. Looking beautiful isn't inappropriate, it's honest. We also bought a lipstick in a shade Gloria called subtle but noticeable and a small bottle of perfume that smelled like gardenias. By the time we returned to Sunset Bay, I felt like I was preparing for an adventure rather than just a meal. Friday evening, I stood in my bedroom looking at my reflection in the full-length mirror Harold had installed so I could check my work clothes before school. The woman looking back at me wasn't young, but she wasn't invisible either. She looked like someone who had taken care of herself, who had stories to tell, who might be worth getting to know. Julian had given me his address and told me to come around 6. The drive to Seaside Drive felt longer than usual, my nerves building. With each block, I kept telling myself it was just dinner, just conversation, just two adults sharing a meal. But my racing heart suggested it was something more significant than that. The Victorian looked magical in the early evening light. Julian had strung small lights along the porch railing, and warm light spilled from the windows of what I assumed was the kitchen. The smell of something delicious drifted through the air as I approached the front door. "You look beautiful," Julian said when he answered my knock, and the sincere appreciation in his voice made my careful preparation feel worthwhile. "Thank you. Something smells wonderful. Coco vin." I figured if I was going to attempt cooking for someone, I should try something impressive. He led me through the house to the kitchen, which had been transformed since my last visit, the original. Cabinets had been restored to their wormwood finish, vintage tile work had been uncovered and cleaned, and modern appliances had been integrated so seamlessly they seemed to belong. It was the kind of kitchen that invited lingering, the heart of a home rather than just a place to prepare food. "This is stunning," I said, running my hand along the restored countertop. "You've done all this in just a few weeks." I had some help from local contractors for the major work. But yes, this was my priority. A good kitchen makes a house feel like a home. Julian had set a small table by the window overlooking the garden, complete with candles and cloth napkins. The coco vin was excellent, accompanied by crusty bread, and a salad that showcased vegetables from the farmer's market we discussed during our coffee date. "This is restaurant quality," I said after my first bite. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "Necessity, mostly. I spent a lot of years traveling for work, eating to many mediocre restaurant meals. I started cooking as a form of self-preservation, and it turned into something I actually enjoyed." "What kind of work required so much travel?" Julian hesitated, that same guarded expression I'd noticed before crossing his features. "Technology consulting." "Very boring, but it paid well enough that I could retire early and pursue projects like this house." There was more to the story. I could tell by the way he changed the subject immediately, asking about my own cooking experiences and whether I'd always lived in Sunset Bay. But I didn't push. Everyone had parts of their past they preferred to keep private, especially when they were starting over. Over dinner, we talked about books, about travel, about the changes we'd seen in the world over the past few decades. Julian was well-read and thoughtful, with opinions that had clearly been formed through experience rather than just reading. He asked insightful questions about my years in education, about what I'd learned from working with teenagers, about how I'd maintained optimism in a job that could be discouraging. "You talk about teaching the way some people talk about their calling," he observed as we lingered over coffee. Do you think you'll ever go back to it in some form? I've thought about tutoring, maybe volunteer work with adult literacy programs. But honestly, I'm still figuring out what the next phase of my life looks like. That makes two of us. I spent so many years focused on the next goal, the next achievement, that I never really considered what I wanted my life to feel like rather than what I wanted it to look like from the outside. And what do you want it to feel like? Julian was quiet for a moment, looking out at the garden where the last light was fading. Peaceful, connected to something real, less about proving myself and more about enjoying what I've built. That sounds like wisdom, or exhaustion disguised as wisdom. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. As the evening progressed, I found myself relaxing in a way that felt both familiar and completely new. This was what I'd been missing without realizing it, the pleasure of adult conversation with someone who saw me as a complete person rather than just a role. Julian didn't treat me like someone's mother or grandmother or a fragile elderly person who needed managing. He treated me like an interesting woman whose thoughts and experiences mattered. When it came time to leave, Julian walked me to my car, and we stood for a moment in the soft light from the porch. The evening air was cool but not cold, and I could hear the ocean in the distance. "Thank you for dinner," I said. "Everything was perfect. Thank you for being here. It's been a long time since I've had such good company." There was a moment when I thought he might kiss me, a pause, a slight movement closer, a look that felt charged with possibility. But then he stepped back, and I realized I was both disappointed and relieved. "Would you like to do this again?" he asked. "Maybe next time I could take you somewhere instead of making you endure my amateur cooking. Your cooking was excellent." But yes, I'd like that very much. Driving home, I felt like I was carrying something precious and fragile, the beginning of something that could become important if I was brave enough to let it. The evening had been everything I'd hoped for and more than I'd expected. But as I pulled into my driveway and saw my house waiting in the darkness, I also felt the weight of the secret I was keeping. How long could I continue having dinners and conversations and whatever came next without telling Emily? How long could I explore this new version of myself while pretending to be the same safe, predictable woman everyone expected me to be? Inside my house, I hung the grey dress carefully in my closet and washed off the subtle but noticeable lipstick. Looking at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, I saw both versions of myself: the woman who'd spent a perfect evening with an interesting man, and the woman who was afraid to let anyone know that such a thing was possible. For the first time since Harold's death, I felt the pull of two different futures, and I wasn't sure which one I had the courage to choose. The call came at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after my dinner with Julian. I was in my garden, deadheading the late-season roses, when my phone rang with Emily's ringtone. "Mum, are you sitting down?" "I'm standing in my garden. What's wrong?" "I need you to go inside and sit down. This is important." Emily's voice had the particular quality it got when she was trying to manage a crisis while maintaining calm, the same tone she'd used when calling to tell me about Harold's first heart attack. I set down my garden shears and walked to the kitchen, settling into my usual chair at the breakfast table. "What's happened?" "Mom, I've been doing some research on your new friend, Julian Reeve." My blood went cold. "What kind of research?" "The kind that mothers do when their elderly parents start spending time with strangers." "I googled him, Mom. Do you have any idea who this man is?" I closed my eyes, sensing that whatever Emily was about to tell me would change everything. "No, I don't think I do. Julian Reeve is the co-founder of Meridian Technologies. He sold the company 3 years ago for $2.8 billion. Billion, Mom. With a B, he's not just wealthy, he's one of the richest men in the Pacific Northwest." The kitchen seemed to tilt around me. Julie and my Julian, who made coq au vin and worried about firewood supplies and talked about the satisfaction of restoring old plaster was a billionaire. That's impossible, I said weakly. You must have the wrong person. I'm looking at his picture right now. Mum, from a Forbes article about tech entrepreneurs who disappeared from public life. It's definitely him. The article says he left the company after some kind of internal conflict and hasn't been seen publicly since. I thought about Julian's reluctance to discuss his work, his mention of moving around cities, his ability to renovate an entire Victorian house without apparent financial concern. Pieces that hadn't fit together before suddenly formed a picture I should have seen. Mum, are you still there? I'm here. I'm just processing. There's more. According to this article, there were rumors about why he left Meridian. Something about a scandal involving his business partner and intellectual property theft. He's been completely out of the public eye for 3 years, Emily. I need to call you back. Mum, wait. You need to be careful here. Men like this don't just randomly befriend elderly women unless they want something. Maybe he's planning to take advantage of you financially, or maybe he's using you as some kind of cover while he hides from whatever scandal drove him out of Silicon Valley. Julian isn't taking advantage of me. How can you be sure? How much do you really know about him? Has he asked you about your finances? Your property? Has he shown unusual interest in your personal information? I tried to think clearly through the shock. Had Julian asked probing questions about my life? Had he seemed interested in anything beyond my company and conversation? The honest answer was no. With anything, he'd been notably private about his own background while showing genuine interest in mine. I have to go. Emily, we'll talk later. Mum, promise me you won't see him again until we figure this out. Promise me you'll be careful. I promised, ended the call, and sat in my kitchen staring at my cold coffee while my mind raced through every conversation I'd had with Julian. How would I miss something so fundamental about who he was? How could someone with billions of dollars be content renovating an old house in a tiny coastal town? More importantly, why hadn't he told me? By afternoon, I'd worked myself into a state of angry confusion that Gloria recognized the moment I walked into the library. What's wrong? She asked, looking up from the children's books she was shelving. You look like someone stole your car. I told her everything: Emily's research, the Forbes article, the magnitude of Julian's wealth, my own feelings of betrayal and foolishness. Gloria listened without interruption, her expression growing more thoughtful with each detail. So he's rich, she said when I finished. Really, really rich. And he didn't mention it. He lied to me, Gloria. I asked him about his work, and he said technology consulting. Very boring, he said. He let me give him advice about coffee shops and firewood like he was some normal person starting over in a small town. Maybe he's some normal person starting over in a small town. Money doesn't automatically make someone a different species. $2.8 billion isn't money, Gloria. It's an entirely different reality. Why would someone like that be interested in someone like me, unless he wanted something? Gloria set down the books she'd been shelving and turned to face me fully. What do you think he wants? I don't know. Emily thinks it might be financial, but that doesn't make sense. He's got more money than God. What could he possibly want from a retired teacher's pension? Maybe he wants exactly what you thought he wanted before you found out about the money. Maybe he wants company, conversation, someone who treats him like a regular person instead of a walking bank account. I wanted to believe her, but the foundation of everything I thought I knew about Julian had shifted. He should have told me. We've spent hours talking about everything from books to childhood memories, and he never once mentioned that he's famous enough to be in Forbes magazine. Did you tell him about Harold's life insurance policy, or your retirement savings, or the value of your house? That's different, is it? You both kept your financial details private. The only difference is the scale. That evening, I found myself pacing through my house, picking up and putting down books, starting and abandoning household tasks, unable to settle on anything. Part of me wanted to call Julian and demand an explanation. Part of me wanted to pretend Emily had never made that call and go back to the simple pleasure of getting to know an interesting man. Part of me wanted to hide in my house and never risk feeling foolish again. The knock at my door at 8 o'clock settled the matter for me. Julian stood on my front porch holding a bottle of wine and wearing an expression that suggested he knew exactly why I might not be happy to see him. "We need to talk," he said. I let him in and led him to the living room, where we sat in the same chairs Harold and I had occupied for countless conversations about far simpler problems. "Emily did some research," I said without preamble. Julian closed his eyes briefly. I was hoping I'd have more time before that happened. "Time for what?" "To figure out how to explain why you've been lying to me for weeks." "I haven't been lying. I've been selective with details." "Selective, Julian. You're a billionaire. You co-founded one of the most successful technology companies in history. That's not a detail, that's your entire life." "No," he said quietly. "That was my life. Past tense. The person you've gotten to know over the past few weeks, that's who I'm trying to be now." I stared at him, searching his face for signs of the deception I was sure must be there. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was enjoying being treated like a normal person for the first time in 20 years. Do you have any idea what it's like to have every interaction filtered through other people's assumptions about your wealth? To never know if someone likes you or likes what you represent. So you decided to test me, to see if I'd pass some kind of authenticity examination?" "No. God, no. I decided to take a vacation from being Julian Reed the tech mogul and just be Julian, the guy renovating his aunt's house. I never intended for it to go this far." "How far is this?" "Exactly, because I'm not sure I know anymore." Julian was quiet for a long moment, looking out my front window at the street, where we'd both chosen to build whatever this was between us. "I'm in love with you," he said finally. I know how that sounds, given the circumstances, but it's true. For the first time in my adult life, I've met someone who sees me instead of my net worth, who enjoys my company without calculating what it might be worth to them. I fell in love with the way you think, the way you listen, the way you make me want to be the best version of myself. My heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. Julian ... double quotes. "I know I should have told you. I know keeping this secret was wrong. But I also know that everything good that's happened between us happened because you didn't know. The moment people find out about the money, everything changes. They start treating me like I'm fragile or dangerous, or like I owe them something. Just for existing. I don't want your money. I know that. That's why I love you." We sat in silence while I tried to process what he'd said. Julian Reeve, billionaire, Forbes magazine subject, founder of companies I'd never heard of, was in love with me. 76-year-old me, with my retirement pension and my small house and my collection of mystery novels. "What happened at your company?" I asked. Emily mentioned a scandal. Julian's expression darkened. "My business partner, someone I'd considered my best friend for 15 years, stole proprietary technology and sold it to our biggest competitor. When I discovered what he'd done, he claimed I was having age-related cognitive issues and tried to have me removed from the company I'd built. The legal battle went on for 2 years before I finally decided it wasn't worth it. I sold my shares and walked away. I'm sorry." That must have been devastating. It was. Not just financially, though that was significant. But the betrayal, the public humiliation, the way people I'd known for years chose sides based on who they thought would be more useful to know, it broke something in me. I stopped trusting my own judgment about people. "Is that why you came here? To hide?" I came here to figure out who I am when I'm not defined by corporate success or public recognition. I came here to find out if there's anything left of the person I was before I became a brand. I looked at this man I thought I'd been getting to know. This stranger who just turned out to be one of the wealthiest people in America. This person who claimed to love me. Who are you, Julian, really? I'm someone who spent 30 years building companies and accumulating wealth without ever stopping to ask why. I'm someone who discovered that all the success in the world doesn't mean anything if you don't have anyone to share it with who cares about you, rather than what you can do for them. I'm someone who fell in love with a remarkable woman and was too afraid of losing her to be completely honest. What do you want from me? Time, a chance to prove that the person you've gotten to know is real, regardless of how much money happens to be attached to him. A chance to find out if what we've started can survive the complication of my past. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my quiet street, where nothing had changed in the past hour, even though everything had changed for me. Julian's revelation didn't just affect our relationship, it affected my understanding of myself. My judgment, my ability to navigate a world that had become infinitely more complex. I need time to think, I said finally. Of course, I understand. Do you? Because I'm not sure I understand anything anymore. 3 weeks ago, I was a widow having coffee with a neighbour. Tonight, I'm apparently the love interest of a billionaire who's been hiding from public scandal. Those are not the same story, Julian. He stood to leave, pausing at my front door. For what it's worth, they feel like the same story to me. I'm still the person who enjoys talking with you about books and renovation projects. I'm still the person who thinks you're beautiful and intelligent and worth spending time with. The money is just ... context. After he left, I called Gloria and told her everything that had happened. So he's in love with you, she said when I finished. That's what you got from this conversation. He's in love with me, among other things, yes. How do you feel about that? Terrified, confused, completely out of my depth. But do you love him back? I was quiet for so long that Gloria prompted me. I think I do. I think I was falling in love with him before I knew any of this. And I don't know if that makes me a fool or just incredibly lucky. Maybe both. Maybe that's what love is at any age, a little bit of both. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and trying to imagine what my life would look like if I chose to trust Julian, to believe that his feelings were real despite the massive secret he kept. I tried to imagine what Emily would say, what the people of Sunset Bay would think, what it would mean to be connected to someone whose world was so different from mine. But mostly, I thought about the way Julian looked at me when we talked, the way he listened to my stories as if they mattered, the way he made me feel like the most interesting person in the room. Those things had been real before I knew about the money. The question was whether they could remain real after by morning. I had my answer. Emily arrived on Thursday morning without warning, standing on my doorstep with an overnight bag and the determined expression she'd worn as a teenager when she decided to challenge my rules. We need to talk, she said, walking past me into the house before I could object. And this conversation requires being in the same room. I followed her into the kitchen, where she immediately began making coffee with the efficiency of someone who'd spent years managing crisis situations. At 46, Emily had inherited her father's practical approach to problems and my stubborn streak, a combination that had served her well in architecture but sometimes made her difficult to live with. You flew here from Portland on a Wednesday morning, I said, settling into my usual chair. This must be serious. It is serious. Mum, I've been researching Julian Reeve for 3 days, and what I've found is concerning. Emily pulled out her laptop and opened it on my kitchen table, revealing what appeared to be a collection of news articles, financial reports, and legal documents. Did you know that when he left Meridian Technologies, there were allegations of financial irregularities. That the SEC investigated the company for 2 years after his departure. No, I didn't know that. Did you know that he's been named in at least 6 lawsuits related to patent disputes and corporate espionage? That he's had restraining orders filed against him by former employees who claimed he was erratic and threatening. Each piece of information felt like a physical blow. Emily, where are you getting this? Public records, court filings, news reports. Mum, this man isn't just wealthy, he's controversial. There are people who think he built his fortune on stolen technology and intimidation. I stared at the screen, trying to reconcile the legal documents with the man who'd made me Coco Vin and talked about restoring old plaster with such genuine enthusiasm. There could be explanations for all of this. I said weakly, there could be. But do you want to bet your safety and financial security on explanations that might not exist? Emily clicked through more articles, pointing out details that painted Julian as ruthless, paranoid, and potentially dangerous. The picture that emerged was of someone who'd accumulated vast wealth through quests, honorable means, and left destruction in his wake. Look at this, Emily said, stopping at a photograph from a technology conference. Julian stood at a podium, wearing an expensive suit, and the kind of confident smile that suggested he owned the room. He looked like a completely different person from the man I'd been getting to know. People can change, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Can they? Or do they just get better at hiding who they really are? Before I could answer, my doorbell rang. Through the front window, I could see Julian standing on my porch, and my stomach dropped. Don't answer it, Emily said immediately. I have too. We're not children, Emily. We're adults having an adult conversation about an adult relationship. Mum, you're 76 years old, and you've been isolated in this small town for 10 years. You're not equipped to handle someone like this. The condescension in her voice sparked anger that cut through my confusion. I'm not equipped. I managed a middle school for decades. Emily, I raised 3 children, cared for your father through cancer, and survived plenty of challenges you know nothing about. Don't treat me like I'm incompetent just because I'm older than you think I should be to make my own decisions. I opened the door to find Julian looking haggard, as if he hadn't slept well. I was hoping we could continue our conversation from last night, he said, then noticed Emily through the doorway. But I see you have company. This is my daughter, Emily. Emily, this is Julian. Emily stepped forward with a protective stance of someone preparing for confrontation. I know exactly who you are, Mr. Reeve. I've been reading about you. Julian's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. I see. And what have you been reading? Enough to know that my mother should be very careful about getting involved with someone who has a history. Emily, I warned. But she continued. Legal troubles, business scandals, allegations of corporate theft. Is any of that inaccurate? Julian was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him making some kind of internal calculation. No, it's not inaccurate, but it's not complete either. Then, please, complete it for us. I led them both into the living room, where the 3 of us sat in a triangle of tension that made my small house feel claustrophobic. Julian looked older than he had the night before, as if the weight of his past had settled back onto his shoulders. You want the complete story, he said finally. Fine. I co-founded Meridian Technologies 23 years ago with my best friend from college. We built it from nothing into one of the most successful software companies in the world. Along the way, I made decisions I'm not proud of, pushed out competitors, acquired smaller companies in ways that destroyed people's livelihoods, prioritized profits over people more times than I can count. Emily leaned forward, vindicated. So you admit to being ruthless. I admit to being successful in an industry that rewards ruthlessness. I'm not proud of it, but I won't pretend it didn't happen. What about the allegations of stolen technology? Emily pressed. Julian's jaw tightened. My business partner, David Chen, was stealing proprietary code and selling it to competitors for 3 years before I discovered it. When I confronted him, he accused me of the same thing and launched a campaign to destroy my reputation and push me out of the company, and the restraining orders filed by employees who were part of David's scheme and were facing termination and criminal charges. The restraining orders were dismissed when it became clear they were harassment rather than legitimate safety concerns. But you did threaten people. I threatened to prosecute corporate espionage to the full extent of the law in today's business climate. That apparently counts as threatening behavior. I listened to this exchange feeling like I was watching a tennis match where the ball was my future. Emily was clearly winning on points, but Julian's explanations had the ring of truth, or at least plausible truth. Why should we believe you? Emily asked, why should we believe that everyone else is lying and you're the victim? You shouldn't, Julian said quietly. You should be suspicious. Your mother is a remarkable woman, and anyone who cares about her should be protective. I would be, in your position. His answer seemed to surprise Emily, who had clearly prepared for defensiveness rather than agreement. But Julian continued, I hope you'll also consider the possibility that someone with as much to lose as I do wouldn't risk it on anything. That wasn't real. I didn't come to Sunset Bay looking for a relationship. I came here to disappear, meeting your mother, falling in love with her. That wasn't part of any plan. It just happened, love. Emily's voice was sharp. You've known her for a month. Sometimes a month is enough. Sometimes you meet someone and you know immediately that they're going to change your life. Emily turned to me. Mom, please tell me you're not buying this. The truth was, I didn't know what I was buying. Julian's explanation made sense. But, so did Emily's skepticism. I was a small-town retiree with no experience in corporate intrigue or billionaire relationships. How could I possibly judge who was telling the truth? I need time to think, I said finally. Both of you need to leave and let me process this. Emily looked stricken. Mom, I'm not leaving you alone to deal with this. Yes, you are, because I'm an adult and this is my decision to make. Julian, I'll call you when I'm ready to talk further. Emily, you can stay tonight. But tomorrow you're going back to Portland and trusting me to handle my own life. After they both left Emily to her hotel, Julian to his house, I sat in my garden with a cup of tea and tried to make sense of the competing narratives I'd heard. On one hand, there was Emily's version. Julian was a corporate predator who'd built his fortune through questionable means and was now targeting a vulnerable elderly woman for reasons that couldn't be good. On the other hand, there was Julian's version. He was a successful businessman who'd been betrayed by his closest friend and was now trying to build a genuine relationship with someone who saw him as a person rather than a bank account. And somewhere in between was the truth, which was probably more complicated than either version acknowledged. That evening, Gloria called to check on me. Emily's in town, I told her. She's done research on Julian that paints a very different picture from the one I thought I was seeing. What kind of different? I summarized the legal troubles, the business scandals, the allegations that had followed Julian's departure from his company. Gloria listened without comment until I finished. So he's not perfect, she said, finally. Gloria, this isn't about perfection. This is about whether he's been lying to me about who he is. Has he lied to you about who he is? Or has he just not told you everything about what he's done? Is there a difference? Of course there's a difference. You haven't told him about the time you got arrested protesting the school board's budget cuts in 1987, but that doesn't mean you've been lying about who you are. I'd forgotten about that arrest, which had resulted in a night in jail and a reprimand from the district superintendent. It seemed like ancient history now, irrelevant to the person I'd become. That's different, is it? You were passionate about something you believed in. You took action that had consequences, and you moved on with your life. Maybe Julian's corporate battles are the same thing on a larger scale, or maybe Emily's right and I'm being naive about someone who's much more sophisticated and dangerous than I can handle. What does your heart tell you about Julian? Not your head, not Emily's research, not what you think you should feel. What does your heart tell you? I closed my eyes and tried to filter out all the noise, the legal documents, the corporate scandals, Emily's fears, my own insecurities. What was left when I stripped away everything except my actual experience of Julian Reeve? My heart tells me he's a good man who's been hurt and is trying to start over, I said finally. My heart tells me that the way he looks at me, the way he talks to me, the way he makes me feel, all of that is real. Then maybe you should trust your heart. And if I'm wrong, if Emily's right and he's playing some kind of long game that I'm too naive to see, then you'll deal with it. You've dealt with worse things than being wrong about a man. You survived cancer twice. Remember, you buried your husband and raised 3 children and managed hundreds of teenagers. You're stronger than Emily gives you credit for, and stronger than you give yourself credit for. After we hung up, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible a month ago. I was going to trust my own judgment, even if it meant risking my safety, my reputation, and my relationship with my daughter. I was going to choose possibility over protection, even though I had no guarantee it would work out. For the first time in my life, I was going to bet everything on love. Friday morning, I called Julian and asked him to meet me at Murphy's Diner at 10 o'clock. If we were going to have the conversation that would determine our future, I wanted it to happen in the most public, ordinary place I could think of. He was already seated in a corner booth when I arrived, looking like he hadn't slept any better than I had. The lunch crowd hadn't started yet, so we had the diner mostly to ourselves except for a few regulars reading newspapers over coffee. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he said as I slid into the seat across from him. "I've made a decision," I said without preamble. "But first, I need you to answer some questions, and I need you to be completely honest. No selective details, no diplomatic half-truths, complete honesty." Julian nodded. "Ask me anything. Did you steal technology from other companies?" "Not directly. But I authorized acquisitions of smaller companies specifically to get access to their proprietary technology, and I didn't always care whether our offers were fair or whether the acquisition would destroy those companies." "Did you threaten people?" "I threatened legal action against people who I believe were stealing from my company. I threatened to destroy the careers of people who betrayed me. I never threatened physical violence, but I did use my wealth and influence to intimidate people." "Are you a good person, Julian?" He was quiet for so long that I wondered if he was going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know. I used to think success was the same thing as goodness, that building a profitable company meant I was contributing to society. I convinced myself that the people who got hurt along the way were acceptable casualties in service of some greater good. And now I think I spent 30 years accumulating power and money while losing track of the person I wanted to be. I think I made choices that were legal and profitable, but not necessarily ethical. I think I became someone I wouldn't want to know if I met him today. Why should I trust you? Because I'm not asking you to trust the person I was. I'm asking you to trust the person I'm trying to become. Because falling in love with you has made me want to be better than I've ever been before." I studied his face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. All I saw was exhaustion and honesty and something that looked like hope. "If I choose to be with you, what would that look like? I'm not going to become some kind of trophy girlfriend. For a billionaire, I'm not going to change who I am to fit into your world. I wouldn't want you to. I left that world, remember? I'm not going back to Silicon Valley boardrooms and charity galas and all the performance that comes with public wealth. I want to stay here, in this house, in this town, with you. What about the money? What about it, Julian? You have billions of dollars. That's not something you can just ignore or pretend doesn't exist. It changes everything where we go, how people treat us, what kinds of problems we have to deal with. It doesn't have to change everything. Most of my wealth is in investments and trusts. I live on a small fraction of the income, and I could live comfortably for the rest of my life without touching the principal. The money doesn't have to define how we live day to day, but it will define how other people see us. Emily already thinks you're taking advantage of me. What do you think the rest of my family will think? What about the people in this town? Julian reached across the table and took my hand. I think some people will be suspicious, and some people will be jealous, and some people will make assumptions about both of us that aren't true. But I also think the people who really matter will judge us based on how we treat each other, not on bank account balances. And if I can't handle it, if the attention and judgment and complication of your wealth becomes too much, then we'll figure it out together. I'm not asking you to sign up for a lifestyle you don't want. I'm asking you to give us a chance to build something together that works for both of us. I looked around Murphy's Diner at the vinyl booths, and fluorescent lighting and handwritten daily specials bored Dan tried to imagine my life becoming something bigger and more complicated than this simple place could contain. There's something else, Julian said quietly. Something I need to tell you before you make your decision. My stomach clenched. What? I've been contacted by journalists. Word is getting out that I'm living in Sunset Bay. And there are reporters trying to track me down. Eventually, they're going to succeed. And when they do, anyone associated with me is going to be scrutinized. What does that mean? It means photographers and questions and speculation about our relationship. It means your privacy disappearing, at least temporarily. It means Emily's worst fears about public attention could come true. I felt the walls of my carefully constructed quiet life closing in. How long before they find you? Days, maybe weeks. I've been careful, but I can't hide forever. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? Because I was hoping I could figure out a way to protect you from it. But I can't, and you deserve to know what you'd be signing up for. We sat in silence while I absorbed this final complication. Dating a wealthy recluse was one thing. Dating a wealthy recluse who was about to be dragged back into public scrutiny was something else entirely. What do you want me to say? I asked. Finally, I want you to say that it doesn't matter. That whatever comes, we'll face it together. That the possibility of building a life with me is worth the risk of temporary chaos. And if I can't say that, then I'll disappear again. I'll sell the house and move somewhere else and leave you in peace. But I'll always love you, and I'll always be grateful that you showed me who I could be when I'm with the right person. The weight of the decision settled on my shoulders. I could choose safety, send Julian away, return to my quiet routine, avoid the complications that came with loving someone whose life was bigger than mine. Or I could choose possibility, accept the risks and challenges and potential heartbreak that came with betting everything on love at 76. Julian's voice was gentle. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about something my friend Gloria said. That maybe love is always a little bit foolish and a little bit lucky, regardless of age. And I'm thinking that I've spent 10 years playing it safe. And safe hasn't made me happy. It's made me content, but not happy. What would make you happy? I looked at this man who turned my world upside down, who'd made me remember what it felt like to anticipate tomorrow instead of just enduring it. You make me happy, Julian, the person you are when we're together, the way you listen to me, the way you make me feel like I'm still becoming rather than just being. All of that makes me happy. Even knowing what you know now, even knowing what's coming. Especially knowing what I know now, because if I've learned anything in 76 years, It's that the things worth having are usually the things that require courage. Julian's face transformed with relief and joy. Does that mean yes? That means yes? But with conditions. Name them. No more secrets. No more selective details. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it honestly, even when honesty is difficult. Agreed. And we're going to do it as equals. Your money doesn't make you more important than me, and my age doesn't make me less capable of making decisions. We're partners or we're nothing. Agreed. And if Emily can't accept this, if my family can't handle the complications that come with your wealth and attention, you're going to help me navigate that without expecting me to choose between you and them? Of course. Julian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I was hoping you'd say yes, so I came prepared. My heart stopped. Julian, what are you doing? I'm asking you to marry me. I know it's fast. I know it's complicated. I know there are 100 reasons why it's not practical. But I also know that I love you more than I've ever loved anyone, and I want to spend whatever time I've left making you happy. He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant solitaire diamond that caught the diner's fluorescent lighting and scattered it into tiny rainbows. Will you marry me, Dorothy Ellison? I stared at the ring, at Julian's hopeful face, at the life-changing moment happening in the middle of Murphy's diner, while the cook hummed in the kitchen and trucks rumbled past on Highway 101. This was at the moment when I stopped being Harold's widow and became someone new. The moment when I chose transformation over safety, love over logic, possibility over protection. Yes, I said. And Julian's face lit up with the kind of joy I'd forgotten was possible. Yes, I'll marry you. He slipped the ring onto my finger. Perfect fit. Somehow Anne leaned across the table to kiss me, while Mabel from the hardware store dropped her coffee cup in shock to booths away. Well, I said, looking down at the diamond sparkling on my 76-year-old hand, I suppose this is going to be interesting. Julian laughed, the first completely relaxed laugh I'd heard from him since the truth about his wealth had come out. I think that might be the understatement of the century. As we left the diner, I caught sight of our reflection in the window, a billionaire tech mogul and a retired small-town principal, holding hands like teenagers. It was ridiculous and improbable and absolutely perfect. For the first time in a decade, I was excited to find out what would happen next. 6 months later, I stood in my garden cutting roses for the kitchen table when I heard the familiar sound of Gloria's car in my driveway. Through the window, I could see her emerging with what appeared to be a bottle of champagne and the satisfied expression of someone bearing good news. The reporter from the Times finally published her piece. Gloria announced, waving a newspaper. As she approached, "Have you seen it yet?" I set down my garden shears and accepted the paper she offered. The headline read Love After 60, a billionaire's second chance at happiness, and the accompanying photo showed Julian and me walking hand in hand along Sunset Bay's beach. It's actually quite fair, I said. Scanning the article, she focused. More on the love story than the scandal. That's because you gave her a love story worth focusing on. Who could resist the romance of a tech mogul giving up Silicon Valley for a small-town school principal? The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of exactly the kind of attention Julian had warned me about. Photographers camping outside my house, reporters calling at all hours, speculation about my motives and his mental state splashed across tabloids and financial websites. Emily had been horrified. Ryan had thought it was totally cool, and the residents of Sunset Bay had ranged from supportive to scandalized. But we'd weathered it together, just as Julian had promised. He'd hired security to protect our privacy, given one carefully planned interview to set the record straight, and then waited patiently for the world to lose interest in our story. Which, eventually, it had. Any word from Emily? Gloria asked. As we settled on my back porch with coffee, she's flying in next weekend for the wedding. Still not entirely convinced I haven't lost my mind, but she's promised to be supportive. And the kids. Ryan is giving me away, and Sophie is reading a poem she wrote about love being an adventure. They're both much more accepting of their grandmother's shocking behavior than their mother is. Gloria raised her coffee mug in a marked toast. To shocking behavior at 76, to shocking behavior at any age. The wedding was planned for the following Saturday, a small ceremony on the beach behind Julian's restored Victorian, with just family and a few close friends. Nothing elaborate or formal, just a celebration of the improbable love we'd found when neither of us was looking for it. Julian emerged from the house carrying his own coffee and the morning's mail, looking relaxed in a way that would have been impossible during those first chaotic months after our engagement. The restoration of his aunt's house was complete, and we'd spent the winter creating a home that belonged to both of us, my books mixing with his, my garden tools sharing space with his woodworking equipment, my practical kitchen wisdom complementing his more adventurous cooking experiments. Anything interesting? I asked, nodding at the mail, the usual bills and investment statements, and this. He handed me an elegant cream envelope, addressed in careful handwriting. Inside was an invitation to the dedication of the Harold Ellison Memorial Reading Garden at Sunset Bay Elementary School, funded by an anonymous donation that everyone in town suspected had come from Julian. You could have told me you were doing this, I said. Though I wasn't really annoyed. You would have argued that it was too much. It is too much. It's exactly right. Harold was part of your story, and your story is part of mine now. Besides, the kids need a beautiful place to read, and you need to see his memory honoured properly. That was Julian's gift, the ability to use his resources in ways that felt meaningful rather than ostentatious. The memorial garden would be beautiful and practical, and would serve the community for generations. It was the kind of legacy Harold would have appreciated. Speaking of stories, Gloria said, have you given any more thought to writing about all this? Someone should document what it's like to find love again at our age. Who would want to read about that? Are you kidding? Half the women in America are going through divorces or becoming widows and wondering if their romantic lives are over. Your story proves that they're not. I looked out at the ocean, thinking about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, careful, cautious, resigned to a life of comfortable routines and gentle pleasures. That woman could never have imagined the life I was living now, full of unexpected challenges and equally unexpected joys. Maybe, I said finally, maybe there is something worth sharing about learning to be brave again. Julian reached over and took my hand, the engagement ring catching the morning light. In a week, it would be joined by a wedding band, and I would officially become Dorothy Reeve. The name still felt strange on my tongue, but I was learning to embrace strangeness as a sign of growth rather than cause for alarm. Any regrets? He asked, a question that had become our morning ritual. About us? None. About the circus that comes with dating a billionaire. Sometimes, about not doing this sooner in my life. That's complicated. How so? I couldn't have done this sooner. I needed to be the person I am now, someone who's raised children and buried a husband and figured out who I am when I'm not defined by other people's needs. I needed to be old enough to know my own mind and brave enough to trust it. So no regrets about the timing. No regrets about the timing. Everything happened exactly when it was supposed to happen. That afternoon, Julian and I drove to Portland to pick up my wedding dress, a simple but elegant design that Gloria had helped me choose from a boutique that specialized in sophisticated women's fashion. At 76, I had no interest in trying to look like a young bride, but I wanted to look like the best version of myself. Nervous? Julian asked as we drove through the Columbia River Gorge. Terrified, I admitted. Not about marrying you, but about everything else, the attention, the changes, the way our lives are going to be different from anything I've ever experienced. We don't have to change anything you don't want to change. The money doesn't have to define how we live, but it will affect how we live, whether we want it to or not. The memorial garden, the security system you insisted on installing, the way people look at us when we go out to dinner, all of that is because of the money. Does it bother you? I considered the question seriously, sometimes. But mostly it feels like the price of admission to an adventure I couldn't have imagined. Wanting adventure? Julian, 6 months ago, my biggest decision was which mystery novel to read next. Now I'm planning a wedding, dealing with reporters, and trying to figure out what it means to be married to someone whose life operates on a completely different scale from anything I've ever known. If that's not adventure, I don't know what is. Good adventure or terrifying adventure? Both, definitely both. Saturday, morning dawn clear and bright, with the kind of perfect coastal weather that felt like a gift from the universe. I woke in my own house for the last time as Dorothy Ellison, surrounded by the familiar objects and routines that had defined my life for a decade. Gloria arrived at 8 to help me get ready, armed with champagne, flowers, and enough nervous energy for both of us. How were you feeling? She asked as she helped me into the wedding dress, like I'm about to jump out of an airplane without knowing if my parachute will open. But you're jumping anyway. I'm jumping anyway. Emily and the grandchildren arrived an hour before the ceremony, and I could see my daughter struggling between her protective instincts and her genuine desire for me to be happy. You look beautiful, Mom, she said, adjusting my simple pearl necklace with the careful touch of someone who was still learning to accept her mother's transformation. Thank you for being here. I know this isn't easy for you. I'm learning that loving someone sometimes means supporting their choices even when you don't completely understand them. That might be the most mature thing you've ever said to me, Emily laughed, and for a moment she looked like the little girl who used to help me pick roses in this same garden. I love you, Mom. I want you to be happy, even if your version of happiness is more adventurous than I think it should be. The ceremony itself was small and perfect. Julian and I exchanged vows we'd written ourselves, standing on the beach, where we'd taken countless walks over the past 6 months. Ryan walked me down the sandy aisle with teenage dignity, and Sophie's poem about love being an adventure made everyone cry. You may kiss the bride, the minister said, and Julian did, while the ocean provided its own soundtrack, and our small gathering of family and friends cheered. Afterward, we had dinner on the restored Victorian's wraparound porch, sharing stories and toasts and the kind of laughter that comes from celebrating something genuinely joyful. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I found myself looking around the table at the people who mattered most to me. Emily was laughing at something Ryan had said, her early attention replaced by genuine pleasure. In the day, Gloria was regaling Julian with stories from our decades of friendship, and he was listening with the same attention he'd always given to my own stories. The scene felt both surreal and absolutely right, like a life I'd dreamed of but never quite believed could happen. What are you thinking? Julian asked quietly, noticing my contemplation. I'm thinking about how different this is from my first wedding. Harold and I were so young, so focused on building a practical life together. This feels like something else entirely. What does it feel like? Like choosing joy instead of just accepting contentment. Like deciding that wanting more from life isn't selfish, even at my age. Our age, Julian corrected with a smile. Our age, I agreed, as our guests began to leave and Gloria hugged me goodbye with tears in her eyes. I realized that this day wasn't just about marrying Julian. It was about completing a transformation that had started the morning I took off my first wedding ring and decided to find out who I could become that night. As Julian and I sat on our porch listening to the ocean and planning our honeymoon trip to Italy, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago. She would never have believed that her quiet, careful life could become something so unexpectedly grand. Any regrets? Julian asked, continuing our ritual, about today. None, about anything. Well, I do regret that it took me 76 years to discover that love doesn't have an expiration date. Maybe that's when you were ready to discover it. Maybe. Or maybe the universe just has a very interesting sense of timing. I looked down at my wedding ring, still sparkling in the porch light, and felt the weight of all the changes it represented. In 1 year, I'd gone from Harold's widow to Julian's wife, from a woman who planned her days around library volunteering and garden maintenance to a woman who was learning to navigate life in a completely different orbit. It was terrifying and wonderful and absolutely right. What happens next? I asked. Whatever we want to happen next. That's the beauty of starting over. We get to write the rest of the story ourselves. As I settled into my new life as Dorothy Reeve, I realized that Gloria had been right about the universe sending exactly what I needed when I needed it. I'd needed to learn that it was never too late to be brave, never too late to choose possibility over safety, never too late to discover that the most important chapters of your life might be the ones you write when everyone assumes your story is already finished. The sound of the ocean mixed with Julian's quiet breathing as he dozed in his chair, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete contentment with exactly where I was and excited anticipation for where I was going. At 76, I was finally ready for whatever adventure came next. Up next, we have more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.